Hi, welcome to the All Things LGBTQ interview show, where we interview LGBTQ guests who are making important contributions to our communities.
All Things LGBTQ is taped at Orca Media in Montpelier, Vermont, which we recognize as being unceded Indigenous land.
Thanks for joining us and enjoy the show.
I've invited back someone that All Things might have interviewed before because there are things that have changed since the last interview that were definitely of interest to me. And I have heard questions from some of you as well. So please welcome back Thomas Renner.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me back. It's always nice to chat with you.
It's always nice spending time with you. And I don't think I've seen you in person since some of the parades.
I think since the State House, actually, when we went for Brenda's memorial, the reading.
Exactly. Okay, so we're going to sort of review really quickly. You know, the things that I'd like to talk with you about are you're a council member on the Winooski City Council, which is one of the few all LGBTQIA plus councils in the country or in U.S. history.
Yeah.
You were the deputy mayor, but now maybe the interim acting mayor.
Correct.
And you're also maybe a member of the LGBTQIA caucus of the Democratic Party.
I am. I keep myself busy. Let's just put it that way.
In addition to just generally being a nice person to spend time with. So why don't you just very briefly say how you became involved both with Vermont and with Vermont politics?
Yeah, so, it's I guess a long but short story in a way. Vermont, kind of age-old story. Parents were divorced. One parent lived here, another parent lived somewhere else. And so I spent a lot of time in Vermont as a kid and kind of just fell in love with it. So because of that split nature of my parents, I said, well, when I go to university, I want to go to university where my dad lives. So to UVM I went, where I diligently studied political science as my minor and public communications. Got to intern with Senator Leahy, which was amazing, and worked for him. Did some other stuff, and kind of during COVID, where I think so many of us kind of explored new things, right, and tapped into some passions, that was one of the few good outcomes of that very long period of time. I started to get involved more in the city that I live in, which is Winooski. I got involved on a local board, and then I started getting involved in elections a little more. And then one thing kind of led to the next, and I ran for city council. I was on city council, and I guess all of my other city councilors really liked me because they appointed me deputy mayor, which was really nice. I ran again for council. I ran for lieutenant governor for a summer. And then most recently, after many months of conversations, the mayor decided to step down to kind of pursue her life and career in a different way. And it turns out that being deputy mayor isn't just a title. It actually means you might have to become mayor. And that happened for me. So now I'm the interim mayor of Winooski, and I'm kind of really excited about that. Pretty proud about it too, because I'm the first, although I'm still just interim, but the first mayor who, one, is a person of color, and also, an out LGBTQ person as well. So.
Okay, let's start talking a little bit about the Winooski City Council.
Yeah.
Its composition of all LGBTQ plus council members.
Correct.
And looking at who you are and your identities, how has that shaped how you view your community? Because Winooski is credited as being the most diverse community in the state.
Yeah.
How does that influence how you make decisions or how you prioritize where the city needs to put its energy and its resources. And thank you for actually answering one of my questions, which is, how is the deputy mayor in Winooski chosen? And then you said it was by your council mates
Exactly. Yeah.
versus such as Barry, where it's appointed by the mayor themselves. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what is it like
So,
being on?
yeah, a lot of times, people talk about the diversity in Winooski, and, frequently they're talking about, diversity and ethnicity and background. But what I also find, a lot of times people say that Winooski is, to Brooklyn, as Brooklyn is to New York City, Winooski is to Burlington, which, I understand the comparisons, but I also like to think we're kind of a little bit like San Francisco, because I feel like there are so many queer people who live in Winooski. So we have that diversity going for us as well. So when Winooski became an all queer council, and at that point it was barring the mayor, who we love her to pieces, but she's not a member of the LGBTQ plus community. It just showed kind of Winooski valuing that diversity and that just kind of special uniqueness that we have as a community within Vermont. And I think that, there are some folks who could say, well, the entire council is queer now, and, but there's not much straight representation. To which I, have countered, I think we've had many, many years of all straight councils. And I want to caveat that, the history is very long. We don't know what people were really feeling or really experiencing, right? But as far as out people in council, this is something that's so revolutionary. We've only seen it in a few cities across the United States. I believe Palm Springs was the first place. So it's really unique and something that I think the whole community has embraced. And when I talk to people, in our community, they are actually so proud of that fact. And it's, I was talking to a family recently at the farmers market, and they had friends come in, and their friends said to me, oh, you're the all queer council, right? So it was something that they had shared with people who were visiting Winooski. So I think it's great. I think it means that, once again, Vermont is kind of leading the way. And that one of our larger cities, and a city so close to our biggest city, chose an all queer council. I think that just shows the values and why we all really like being in this state, right?
Exactly. And I had served on the select board in Plainfield many years ago,
Yeah.
and became the chair of the board, which for small communities, that does make you the mayor.
Yeah.
And the frequent comment that I got back from people who lived in town was thanking me and saying that they thought, because of my sexual orientation and my presence in the community, I looked at issues differently. I didn't necessarily just adopt a standard response. I looked
Mhm.
at, now it's phrased, I looked outside the box for,
Yeah.
okay, is there a unique Plainfield response? Do you find that with the council in Winooski?
So, I think, when you grow up queer, right, you spend so much of you go through what would be a normal childhood, teenager experience in a very different way. You learn how to appeal to different groups. Sometimes you have to learn how to change a little bit of who you are. So all of those things, I think, give you a very different perspective on day-to-day life than most people have experienced. So when you see a problem, you're really looking at it from 3, 4, 5 different angles, because you're used to having done that your entire life. So I think, I think Winooski has done so well these past few years because we've had so many members on council who have spent their whole lives looking at issues in more than just one straightforward way.
And a very quick comment about, Winooski is to Burlington like Brooklyn is to New York. There are some of us who really like Brooklyn.
Well, yeah,
So,
exactly. Yeah.
so looking at Winooski and the growth and the things that are happening, what are the challenges facing the council right now? What are the challenges facing you as the interim mayor? and then we'll follow up with so is there a consideration you might run for it as a permanent designation?
Yeah, so
Because I'm going to have to ask you that.
I know you're gonna have to ask. I know you're gonna have to ask. We're facing the same problems that I think, we used to just say Chittenden County is facing, but it's really the entire state, housing. We have a housing shortage, and Winooski has really kind of been on the forefront of building housing for our tiny little 1 square mile. But we have people who live in our city currently who are underhoused. We've got large families living in 1 or 2 bedroom apartments. We've got people who want to come to the city, who can't. And we're trying to build housing, but we don't have the space. And two, it takes a long time to build housing, even when you do have the space. I was just at a meeting last night, actually. So this is a great question where our kind of one last piece of land in Winooski went up for sale and was purchased by Champlain Housing Trust. And they're proposing a large four large apartment complexes and some condos as well. And the community really showed up for this meeting last night. Advocates for housing, folks who are concerned about the community changing, and that's the problem, and those are the conversations that people are having all across Vermont. So Winooski is definitely not unique in that aspect. And then, another similar problem is a tax base that isn't growing as fast as our expenditures are. So budget season's coming up. We're going to be looking at how we can be creative, how we can try to provide our communities with all of the services that they expect, without also taxing them too much. And then also, I don't know if you've been up here recently, Keith, but we've got a big Main Street project going on where we've dug up our entire Main Street. Well, the news has been focusing on Burlington's project, but we've got one here too that they talked about a little bit, but Burlington's been getting the ire, I think, that way. And then we're going to be having this huge project on our bridge as well, which is also going to impact businesses a lot. So those are kind of the things that are forefront of mind for me. In this interim place that I'm in right now, my main goal is driving the budget forward and making sure that we're providing a good, balanced, clean budget that also provides services to people. And the future, I gotta figure that out. The great thing about this interim role is I get to take the mayor's job for a spin before I decide if it's something that I want to apply for. But I've always said my intent with public service is to do what is needed of me and how I feel like I can help the most. So I'll be running for something, whether it's either my council seat or whether it's for the mayor. I got to figure that out. Don't have too much longer to figure that out, but I will very soon.
Okay, so your term on the council, it will be coming up for
Correct.
reelection this
Yep.
coming.
Day.
Okay, so that would be a great time to make a decision about, okay, which role do I really want to be in?
Exactly.
And before we move on to your day job, um, the housing that's being proposed, this is mixed housing. So there would be housing for all income levels. There would be some senior, elder identified, that
Yeah,
type of
so
mix.
not entirely mixed in that specific structured way. It's all permanently affordable. So
Okay.
folks who, meet those income thresholds will be able to apply, whether they're, young families or elder folks. The mixed portion of this, which is really cool, is some of the units are going to be purely for rentals, and some of them are actually for a purchasable program through shared equity through Champlain Housing Trust. So it's a really great way for folks who wouldn't be able to get into a traditional mortgage situation to be able to finally buy a home and start to build that equity that so much of our economy is built on.
Okay. That sounds really encouraging. And
Yeah.
is there a timeline for this?
Not yet. They're still in the
Okay.
super early phases. They were just presenting their kind of first pictures of it yesterday, seeking community input. So we're still a few years away until we start to see stuff going up in the air. But hopefully
Okay, so
on that.
so it still needs to go through the Act 250 and the local zoning process and all of those things that are just so
Oh,
much fun. Okay.
exactly.
Right now, politics are so polarized and there is such high emotion.
Yeah.
Have you noticed a shift or a change in the phone calls that are coming in or the concerns that you have about our current political process?
Yeah, no, I definitely have. And I'll talk a little more too about just my role in Winooski in that way as well, because I really see it through my role on council, and that there is a lot more concern and fear in the community. And also there is, I think people are very, grappling or trying to grapple for any fix, solution, advocacy that they can. And I bring it back to council because, my our roles really as counselors, as select boardmen, is the roads, the library, all that hyper local stuff, right? And folks are reaching out now about you know Gaza, wars, in Africa, the, political situation with the president, foreign relations, with the United Kingdom, which are, traditionally kind of so outside the scope of, a small city councilor in Vermont, right? But I think there's so much tension and anxiety, because of what's happening in all of those fronts, that people are just trying to get heard wherever they can, and feeling, a lot more dire about things. I speak to some folks and I just see the stress in their eyes, and I completely understand it. But we're definitely seeing it a lot more.
I know every time there's something that happens, I'm looking over my shoulder
Right.
and being thankful that I'm here in Vermont, but also know that I'm not insulated.
Yeah, I
That
mean, we were just my husband and I were lucky enough to go to a wedding abroad in Europe last week, and as we were coming home, we were really like, what are we going back to? All of this, situation with Charlie Kirk had happened. We'd seen the news, and we were just kind of fearful about coming back, just because we didn't know what we were going to be stepping off the plane and encountering.
did you encounter any difficulties coming through customs back into the US?
Keith, I was worried, because of what had happened to the Winooski superintendent Wilmer, also an out gay man, who has said very similar things that I have online, and in social media. And I didn't have anything, thankfully. I was so relieved. I mean, I kind of had a knot in my stomach as we are getting off the plane and walking up to customs. Um, it was really easy, which, it hasn't been for so many people. So I felt really thankful.
I I take that as encouragement as I'm planning a visit just across the border to Canada
Mm. Yeah,
and wondering what am I going to encounter
right.
coming back because my documentation has a gender X identifier on it.
Yeah,
So, all right. So with that, thank you for spending this time with us.
I was
Uh,
happy to. Thanks for having me.
and I'll be waiting to see what T-shirt I should be wearing when election season comes around.
I will let you know.
All righty. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, everybody. I'm here with SaraEllen Strongman, who's been kind enough to join us and talk about the publication of Essential Poems by Pat Parker, which she edited. Let me tell you a little about SaraEllen, if you don't mind. She's currently an assistant professor in the Department of African American and African Studies at the University of Michigan. She was previously an LSA Collegiate Fellow, and I looked up LSA and I don't know what it stands for. Can you tell us?
It's the acronym for the college, so the College of Literature, Sciences, and the Arts.
Oh, lovely. This is this is at the University of Michigan, and you were in the department for AI annual year, right? 2018 through 2020.
Yes, for academic year. Yeah, so I was a
Academic
postdoc.
year.
Yeah, so I was a postdoc for 2 years and then joined the faculty in 2020.
Great. And you research and teach in the fields of Black feminism, African American literature, and gender and sexuality studies. You got your PhD in Africana Studies from the University of Pennsylvania. Very illustrious. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
It's great. Let's dive right in to the current volume that we're going to talk about. Who is Pat Parker, and how did you come to edit her essential poems?
So Pat Parker is a Black lesbian feminist poet who wrote and published about 5 collections in the 1970s and 1980s. And she was just an absolute powerhouse. She tragically passed away quite young in 1989 of breast cancer, but she was a colleague and a good friend to a number of people who I think are much more well known, like Audre Lorde. They were longtime friends and collaborators. She also was good friends and collaborated with Judy Gran, another lesbian poet. And she's someone who was just very much in the midst of some exciting social and political movements of that era.
I remember hearing her read on Lesbian Concentrate, that album. And I was looking at her bio and discovered that she was born 7 years before I was in Houston, Texas. So, but she died very young, as you say. It was very, very sad. Why do you think there hasn't been a biography? A lot of her close friends and colleagues have had several biographies. Most recently, The Wonderful Survival is a Promise by Alexis
Yes.
Pauline Gumbs of Audre Lorde. Why do you think that is?
So I will say that there is a chapter in Gumbs's fantastic biography about Audre Lorde and Pat Parker's friendship and their relationship. I think that some of it is that a lot of Parker's materials, some of her publications just haven't been in circulation. She published most of her collections with independent feminist presses. And as a result, a lot of them have, slightly smaller print runs. And because they're sort of, almost handbound, some of them are like these stapled booklets, the early collections. They just haven't physically survived as many copies. Firebrand did release Movement in Black and a revised version of it following Parker's passing, so that has been around. More recently and excitingly, Julie Enzer, who is an incredible scholar and poet in her own right, and of course the publisher and editor of Sinister Wisdom, has been making Parker's work more available. So she published the complete works of Pat Parker, edited another volume of letters between Parker and Lorde, which were edited by Mecca Jamila Sullivan, that Sinister Wisdom also published. And I will say that only recently, so while I was in graduate school, did Parker's personal papers become available. They had been in her longtime partner had them since Parker's death, and they're now housed at the Schlesinger Library at Radcliffe, along with a lot of other fabulous papers, such as June Jordan's papers. So now I think that scholars have that material and more of it. I'm excited I think there is more work being done on her, and hopefully that will lead to a biography soon.
That is very encouraging. I didn't know that. I read the correspondence. It's fabulous that
I know.
Julie edited. Now, you say in the introduction that you came to know Parker through her poem For the White Person Who Wants to know How to Be My Friend, and that the poem reveals Parker as a trickster. Would you mind reading the poem and talking a little about Parker as a trickster?
That would be my pleasure. So the poem is titled For the White Person Who Wants to Know How to Be My Friend. The first thing you do is to forget that I'm Black. Second, you must never forget that I'm Black. You should be able to dig Aretha, but don't play her every time I come over. And if you decide to play Beethoven, don't tell me his life story. They made us take music appreciation too. Eat soul food if you like it, but don't expect me to locate your restaurants or cook it for you. And if some Black person insults you, mugs you, rapes your sister, rapes you, rips your house, or is just being an ass, please do not apologize to me for wanting to do them bodily harm. It makes me wonder if you're foolish. And even if you really believe blacks are better lovers than whites, don't tell me. I start thinking of charging stud fees. In other words, if you really want to be my friend, don't make a labor of it. I'm lazy, remember.
What a great poem. And you said you first came upon this, and that's what drew you to her to explore her work further?
Yeah, I had never encountered her at all until graduate school when I was taking a class on African American poetry, and I was looking for an author to do a project on. We had to write a bibliographic essay, and I came across this poem in like a really random anthology of African American poetry. It wasn't the Norton, it wasn't a big one, and I just thought the poem was so clever and so funny. And I had to find out who this person was. And it took me a while to sort of track down some of her collections because so many of them were no longer circulating. But that was the beginning. Uh, you asked me to talk about sort of Parker as a trickster. The trickster is a figure in sort of folklore. We often think of sort of Anansi the spider as the trickster, and Parker as someone who was funny, has many poems in what she's doing sort of pretty trenchant commentary and analysis of her experiences, of how oppression, sexism, racism, homophobia, imperialism, how they work in the world, but at the same time injecting levity. So these critiques are sort of colored by that, and I think in some ways they land not softer, but that the message sort of gets Trojan horsed in. Parker was someone who is described by so many people as being a performance poet, of having this rich, sonorous voice because of things like Lesbian Concentrate, which featured her reading her poems. We do have some recordings of her reading, and she just has an incredible voice and must have had such a stage presence. People talk about it all the time. So I think also then these poems lend themselves to her style, her performance style of sort of bringing people in while at the same time forcing them to confront some uncomfortable facts and to think a little bit deeper about these things as well.
And you talk about how she confronts all kinds of oppressions, goes to a conference of white feminists and writes poetry about that, goes to an African American Black arts, participates in that scene and challenges the sexism. I mean, it's really intersectional at a time when intersectionality was coming to the forefront. So let me ask you, you include a prose piece at the end of the collection that originally appeared in that groundbreaking This Bridge Called My Back. How did you happen to put that in?
So Parker, of course, is known as a poet. She initially, as a child, she always wanted to be a writer, but she initially wanted actually to be like a novelist. And she ended up becoming a poet in part because she was married for a few years to the Black Arts Movement playwright Ed Bullins. When she was young, it seems like he was abusive in that marriage. And in addition to being physically and emotionally abusive, he was very critical of her work, of her writing. And so she had has commented in at least one interview she gave later on in life about, deciding to write poetry because he didn't know anything about poetry and he couldn't do anything. Like he couldn't say anything about that. And of course, she became an incredibly accomplished poet. So this essay, Revolution, It's Not Neat, are pretty are quick is initially it was a speech she gave at a conference in Oakland in 1980, and it is about revolution and the challenges that are faced. And although it is one of very few prose pieces that was at all published during her life or afterwards, it is, I think, a really beautiful encapsulation of her politics, of her thinking, her ability to be a theorist as well as an activist. And it is a thing that, of other things she's written that have circulated, because it was in This Bridge Called My Back, it's something that people see. So it felt, if we're talking about the things that were essential, even though it's not a poem, it felt essential to include this part of her work as well, especially since it's a little bit later in her writing career.
And I also like that it includes an international perspective.
Yes.
And that's what we don't often see in scholarship of the women in print movement, or maybe we do. But that's a great feature that I especially applaud. How did you, So how long did it take you to compile these poems?
It probably took 6 to 9 months of going back and forth with Julie. She invited me to edit this collection and to choose the poems, and it was a real labor of love choosing them, but also really difficult. We didn't want to create a huge compendium. It is a really lovely pocket edition. But sort of deciding both what had to be in there, but what are some poems that are maybe less well known of hers that I wanted to include because I think they were important pieces of her, including some of her older work from her first collection. Some of those poems don't circulate as much as poems from her later work.
And you also said in your introduction that you tried to select poems showcasing all the different identities that she had, all the different aspects of her life. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So Julie selected you, and I guess we should shout out to the Sapphic Classics. This volume is one of them. Can you tell us a little about the Sapphic Classics?
So the Sapphic Classics is a series of books that Sinister Wisdom has released. They've done some really exciting things. So they published the complete works of Pat Parker. They published the collection of letters between her sister love, between her and Lord. They have most recently published a collection of Anita Cornwell's writing, incredible Black feminist lesbian essayist. And so the idea is to get some of these works that have gone out of print back into circulation for new generations to be able to access, but also to enjoy, that this work stays alive and that people can still read it and enjoy it today. And Julie has done such an incredible job. It's an amazing stable of titles. And I encourage anyone who hasn't checked them out yet to go and see what there is to offer.
I know, it's a fabulous project, and I actually am old enough to own the originals of many of these works, so it's great to have, they're yellow and falling apart, so it's great to have new editions by smart contemporary scholars like yourself. Speaking of your scholarship, you're very involved with your teaching at University of Michigan, I'm sure, but you're also, you have a couple of books in the works. Is that true?
I've got a book in the works based on my dissertation. It's called The Social Life of Black Feminism. It is the project through which I, first started doing deeper research on Parker. I'm looking at the sort of first cohort, the first generation of Black feminists who called themselves that, who claimed Black feminism, and examining their work to build an autonomous parallel movement. So looking at the women of the Combahee River Collective, thinking about poets like Parker and Lord and how they are navigating predominantly white spaces, and all the way up through the 1980s and 1990s, where I look at the first charter generation of Black feminist literary critics. So it takes us through a couple of different areas in which Black feminists are writing and doing their politics through literature, while also arguing that so much of this work is impossible without understanding the communities that birthed it and their social connections. So how these people not only are collaborating professionally and artistically, but also see each other as sources of support. So many of these women are friends and acquaintances. And once you sort of get in the archives to see who is writing letters to whom and who knows who and who is thanking so-and-so, for the lovely dinner that they had, it was really incredible to see that somewhat hidden network of connections between these brilliant, brilliant people.
That is so exciting. What writers do you consider besides
Besides Lord and Parker, I look at Barbara Smith's work, so a lot of her writing and her theory. I have a short section on actually the one published poem of hers that came out in Conditions in the years ago. I write a little bit about June Jordan. I'm also looking at Cheryl Clark, Jewel Gomez, and then of course with the scholars, I'm looking at people like Hortense Spillers, Deborah McDowell, this other sort of parallel generation of people who were among the first Black women to become professors in predominantly white universities of African American literature at the moment where it's becoming a more solidified field.
That is fabulous. And I noticed there's an upcoming Lesbian Lives conference in New York, and there are a couple of sessions, one about the Combahee River Collective. with Demita Frazier, a rock star. So, and I hate to reminisce, but, I lived in Boston between 1979 and 84, and I went to a women's studies conference, and there was, and Demita Frazier was there, and a couple of other members of the Combahee River Collective. I mean, it was just fabulous. I mean, I'm such a huge fan. So this is so exciting that you're doing this work, SaraEllen. I can't wait to read the book.
Well, thank you.
We have a little time, so why don't we read a little more Parker if you're available to select
Okay.
and read some poetry.
What should we do?
There's one that you mentioned, but it was too long.
We could maybe do Hente, this, which is not super long.
Sure. What page is that on? Just
That
so
is 66.
Okay.
So Hente is as best as I can tell, is a poem about this group that Parker was a part of in the Bay Area. They started off as a sort of club rec sports team. So the Lesbian Bar League was doing basketball and softball, and a group of women of color decided it would be fun if they made their own team. Hente then went on to have other organizations, and they founded actually the Hente Gospelaires, of which Parker was a member. They were also a choir. So I sort of read this as being about her experience in that group with those women, as opposed to some of the other spaces that she critiques really heavily elsewhere in her work. It's difficult to explain a good feeling. My world has become colorful, a rainbow of hues now, a part of my living, and it feels good. It feels good to listen to people talk about the streets and know it's not a vicarious experience. It feels good to sit and be loose, to talk without worry about the racist in the room. It feels good to hear we're gonna have a party and know it's really going to be a party. It feels good to be able to say my sisters and not have any reservations. But best of all, it feels good to sit in a room and say, have you ever felt like? And somebody has.
That is great. What's the poem about domestic violence?
That one, it's untitled. So that would be, I think you're talking about Brother, page 24.
Yes, can we read that, please?
Sure. So this poem is one of just a handful of Parker's poems that actually has an epigraph. So before the poem, there's a quote from Harriet Tubman. There are two things I've got a right to, and those are death or liberty. One or the other I mean to have. Brother, I don't want to hear about how my real enemy is the system. I'm no genius, but I do know that system you hit me with is called a fist.
Right. That's so powerful.
I think there's a real economy of language with Parker's work. So many of these shorter poems of hers are just absolutely incredible, just so impactful in a short amount of time. But she has so many other longer poems that we don't have time to read, but I was excited to be able to include some of these longer poems, including a couple of poems about her experience coming out and growing up and coming to be who she was, meditating on her life experiences, her upbringing in Houston in a working class, poor Black family, but also her journey towards coming out as a lesbian and living in that community and as a Black lesbian feminist at a time when it was not the easiest thing to do.
No. She mostly spent all of her time in California, in the Bay Area.
Yep. So she grows up in Texas, and she moves to California at the end of her teenage years, ostensibly sort of to do some college. One of her sisters is already out there, and she stays. And she goes on to make a life, in San Francisco, in Oakland. She works for many years at the Oakland Feminist Women's Health Clinic. I'm going to mess up the name of this place. But this one of the first women's health clinic that did women's health, that offered abortion care as well as just general health care for women in the community. So she has a long period of time doing that. There's a couple times where she teaches writing, as well as just doing things, so that she could be a writer. She reads in so many clubs in Oakland and San Francisco, some places that still exist, some that no longer do. But that is really where she built her life, including with her partner, Marty Dunham, and their daughter, um, uh, who 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 she also has written some poems to that are included in this collection.
We're drawing to a close. Let me ask you two things. First, are there any concluding valedictory remarks you'd like to share with the audience? And following that, would you mind closing us out with a third Parker poem?
Okay. So closing remarks. I will say that I am so excited for this volume, for it to be easier for people to get an introduction to Parker, and that in this moment that we are living in, with the rise of fascism, with sort of what feels at times like unchecked state power, that Parker's politics, her incisiveness, and her calls to do what is right and to fight for those who need it, including ourselves, is and remains incredibly necessary. I want to read what should I do? Okay. In that case, since that's the thought I'm ending with, then maybe I will read, where is it?
I should have given you advance notice.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, so we'll read, this is another short poem that's untitled, from her first collection. In English Lit, they told me Kafka was good because he created the best nightmares ever. I think I should go find that professor and ask why we didn't study the SF police department.
Fabulous. SaraEllen Strongman, thank you for joining us. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me, Anne.
Thank you for joining us. And until next time, remember, resist.